want to welcome everybody to our first training in our Advocacy Amplified series. My name is Mike Poulin, and I'm a member of the Mercy Justice team. I work in Omaha, Nebraska. And on behalf of the Mercy Justice team, I want to thank you for your involvement in our social justice advocacy via our action alerts. Back in September, we met with a small group of our advocates to gauge interest in increasing their engagement in advocacy, and this training series is a result of that meeting. We expect to be together for about 30 minutes tonight. We're going to hear from two presenters about writing letters to the editor. We'll have time for some questions, and then we'll tell you what's coming up next. But first, joining us from Silver Spring, Maryland, is the director of our Mercy Justice team, Lamar Bailey, and he is going to lead us in prayer.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. It really warms my heart and warms the team, the Justice team's heart to have you here today. Just want to thank you so much for the work that you do, the work of justice, and immersing your full self in the work of justice. We really appreciate that, and it's wonderful to partner with you. And it's also good to see a lot of familiar faces on the screen, as well as some new faces. My prayer today is a homily that Pope Francis gave in September of 2013, and it's something I've just been thinking about a lot and just wanted to share with you. And so I'll just read, it's rather short, and I'll read that, and I'll close us in a prayer. I'll just give you a little bit of time to just kind of gather yourself and collect your thoughts and focus and center. Every man and woman who assumes the responsibility of governing should ask themselves these two questions. Do I love my people so that I may better serve them? And am I humble enough to hear the opinions of others so as to choose the best way of governing? If they do not ask themselves these questions, they will not govern well. Even those governed must make the choices. So what should you do? 1 Timothy chapter 2 says, first of all, then I urge that supplications, prayers, intercessions, and thanksgivings be made for all men, for kings and all who are in high positions, that we may lead a quiet and peaceable life, godly and respectful in every way. This means that no one of us can say, this doesn't affect me. They are the ones who govern. No, I am too responsible for the way they govern, and I must do what I can to help them well. By participating in politics when I can. Politics, according to the social doctrine of the Church, is one of the highest forms of charity because it serves the common good. Television and newspapers rely primarily on abusing politicians. There is hardly anyone reporting that this ruler has done well in this, and this ruler has this virtue. She or he was wrong in this, but in this they did well. Instead, all that you hear about politicians is that they are always wrong and are always against you. Perhaps the ruler is a sinner, as David was. I have to work with others, with my opinion, with my words, to help amend. I do not agree for this reason or that. We need to participate for the common good. Sometimes we hear, a good Catholic is not interested in politics. This is not true. Good Catholics immerse themselves in politics by offering the best of themselves so that the ruler can govern. What then is the best thing that we can offer rulers? It is prayer. It is like Paul says, pray for kings and for all those who have power. A Christian who does not pray for rulers is not a good Christian. We need to pray. Let us pray for rulers that they govern us well, that they bring our homeland, our nation, our world forward to achieve peace and the common good. The Word of God helps us to better participate in the common life of the people. Those who govern with the service of humility and love, and the governed with participation and especially prayer. Let us pray. Lord God, we seek to better understand the issues and concerns that confront our nation and world, and how Jesus compels us to respond as faithful citizens. We ask for open eyes so that we might see each other as one and equal in dignity, especially those who are victims of abuse and violence, war and poverty. We ask for ears that will hear the cries of people oppressed because of race or creed, religion or gender. We ask for bold feet and voices to immerse ourselves in politics by offering the best of ourselves so that rulers can govern. Grant all leaders mercy and humility so that they may act with justice. Amen.
Thank you, Lamar. For the bulk of tonight's presentation, we brought in an expert to give us guidance on writing letters to the editor. So joining us also from Silver Spring, Maryland, is Kathleen Farrell, the Sisters of Mercy Institute Communications Officer. Welcome, Kathleen.
Thank you, and good evening, everyone. I'm Kathleen Farrell, and I'm the head of communications for the Sisters of Mercy of the Americas. Delighted to be with all of you this evening and afternoon, for those of you who are in an earlier time zone. I'm going to give you some kind of high-level pointers on letters to the editor, and Sister Rosemary Tresp will fill it out more, and then I think both of us will take questions. So with that, I'll tell you a little bit about myself before I begin. I am a former immigration advocate, and I was a journalist for many years. In my role as an immigration advocate, I was responsible for getting probably thousands of letters to the editor into papers and on media platforms all over the country, as well as op-eds, opinion pieces, and perhaps we'll do a workshop on opinion pieces at a later date. But tonight we're going to look at letters to the editor, or LTEs, as we call them. So the thing to always keep in mind is who you are writing something to, who you are trying to focus on or target. And the second, especially in advocacy, this is really important, is what do we want them to do? So those are two questions you ask yourself through the process of developing and trying to place your letter to the editor. The second slide is, why do we write letters to the editor? And there are kind of three big reasons. One is to influence the conversation. So the conversation in the public square. It's a great opportunity to weigh in. The second is to educate. There's always an opportunity to educate people on an issue or a topic. That's another reason that we write letters to the editor. And for advocacy, probably the most important is we want to move people to action. So as you're thinking about writing a letter to the editor, ask yourself if any of these three reasons, if you can answer that you want to do any of these three things: influence the conversation, educate your audience, or move people to action. Any or all of them are valid reasons to write a letter. Let's go back to the beginning. Again, that question, who is the audience? Who am I writing this for? Is it an elected official? Is it a decision maker? And that could be a captain of industry, or somebody who is running a school, or somebody who's in, an ability is in the seat of making a decision. Or is it the general public? Now, could you move to the next screen? Thank you. So a word in defense of the average Joe, when I talk about the general public, there's always a good reason to think about the average person as someone you're writing a letter to the editor for. And we don't want to miss this opportunity, because your readers are potential stakeholders. They are potential force multipliers. So as you give them arguments, they are able to carry those arguments as well. And probably the most difficult idea is they might hold an opposing view or an opposing viewpoint. And that's somebody that, again, we want to help educate. So keep in mind that it's really important as well. You want to go back 2 slides to number 5, please. Thanks. So keep in mind that it's really important to think about the general public as well. What to write about? Well, there are a number of things that we can write about, that we can write letters about. We can write in response to an article that was written in a paper or that's in the news, or we can write in support of an article. You're likely to get a lot more traction if you're writing in response and you're probably pointing out the error of the writer's ways. We can write about an opinion piece, or what's called an op-ed. So an op-ed, that's an old-fashioned word, and it refers to guest commentaries or columns that were written on the page opposite to the editorial page. The editorial page, as you probably know, is the outlet, the newspaper or television station's official stance on something. So you could be writing in response to that. Probably what you're most interested in here is advocating for legislation or advocacy purposes. And again, it's always worthwhile to try to raise awareness. And that is, again, educating or influencing. Thank you. And then how to write. Couple of really important things to keep in mind when you're writing a letter to the editor. Keep it short and sweet. Don't repeat the entire article or the argument. Summarize it in 25 words or less. So, dear editor, your piece last week about, the ban of plastic bags in the state of Maryland, neglected to point out, et cetera, et cetera. So you've really zeroed in on what you're writing about. When you're writing about legislation, name the bill, name the legislator or the legislators. Very, very important. Why? Because those are things that get picked up by politicians. If their name is in something, number one, you're addressing them, but their staff is also culling and scrubbing the web, looking for mentions of them, so it will get their attention. When you write, you make an argument in support of the legislation. This is the opportunity to educate. So think like educators. I am explaining why this piece of legislation or this action of advocacy is so important. And then you don't always have enough space when you're writing a letter to the editor, but try to include a call for support or a call for action. Calling either on your legislator to support the bill, but also on your fellow citizens and stakeholders to support what you're trying to propose. And then the next one. So a favorite quote, all politics are local. So when you're choosing an outlet or a platform or a medium, keep that in mind, that the more targeted that you can be, the better. So the next slide, please. How to place your letter to the editor. So it's great. You've identified your audience. You've identified what you want them to do. You've written this great little piece of 150 words or less. So then you want to identify the outlet. Again, think about your target, who you really want to see this. Look up their guidelines. So all reputable newspapers and media platforms will have guidelines. They'll tell you the number of words that they allot. You will need to sign your piece with your address, often just saying, Kathleen Farrell, Annapolis, Maryland, so that they know that I am a local. That will catch an editor's attention because they know that you're a local reader. It's very important. A phone number, and I should have included an email so they can contact you. Most media outlets will have a disclaimer that says they reserve the right to edit for style and length. So if you use dangling modifiers or split infinitives or, commit one of the other sins of grammar, the editor might very kindly edit for style, and they will also probably edit for length. So you're better off to make sure that you stick to the guidelines so they don't cut out something that you've written that you think is really, really important. And that may change the meaning of what you've written. Always try to find out who this is going to. A lot of outlets will just say, send it to letters@capitalgazette.com. If you can possibly find out a name, that's really great, because then you can call up and very gently badger an editor to see if your letter is going to run. Following up is very, very important. You can only follow up if you know who you've sent it to. And then the last piece is your work's not done. You've written it, you've gotten it in, you've gotten it published. And once it's been published, make sure that the people you really want to see, you really want to read your letter to the editor, receive it as well. So stakeholders, legislators, anybody you can send it to. We live in an exciting time where we can amplify our own work. So be sure to do that. I wrote an op-ed earlier this year, and it was about immigration. And I live in Annapolis, Maryland, which is the capital of Maryland, as you all know. And I had it published in the Capital Gazette here. And then I sent it to my state reps, my state senator, my senator, congressman, and the governor, with personal notes to each of them, because that's a very, very important step. You want to make sure that, when a tree falls in the forest, I mean, people might miss it. So you want to make sure, if somebody wasn't reading the paper or the website that day, that you're giving them another opportunity to see your good work. So with that, I will leave it, and when Rosemarie finishes, we can take questions. So we'll leave that till the very end.
Thank you, Kathleen. That was great. I really hadn't thought about spreading my letter to the editor on to some past having it written and published. But first of all, I want to talk about what topics should you pick to write your letter. And really, the topic is what you're knowledgeable about, what you're passionate about, although you don't have to be an expert, or what you're really aggravated or angry about even. So what is it that you feel strongly enough about to be able to say, I'm going to sit down and take the time to think this out? Now, as Kathleen said, you really are wanting to do this with local newspapers. Now, I don't know if everyone's even has a newspaper, a diocesan newspaper, but I have gotten a couple of letters actually published in our diocesan newspaper. One was on capital punishment. So, that's also an opportunity to influence within your religious organization, if that's possible. But basically, what we know is that the majority of letters that are chosen for publication usually relate to what the newspaper or the magazine or whatever actually is creating in their own content. So I took time to look at one of our local newspapers, the Gaston Gazette. There was an article on public transportation, an article on housing, an article on drugs, and an article on gun violence. Any of these, if you're passionate about, you could look at and say, here's an opportunity, for example, to write a letter in response, depending on what the article is. With drugs, it could be education of students. It could be the criminal justice system. There's lots of opportunities just with those topics, depending on what the article was, to write a response, to educate, to encourage some legislation or some actions. The Charlotte Observer, which is the major newspaper there, had articles about the storms and the flooding. Great opportunity to respond. What are we doing about the environment? What are we doing in our area? There was an article about a criminal justice article on a wrongful rape conviction, which again is an opportunity, if you're passionate about that issue, to answer and to add some education or to respond to something. In the same Charlotte Observer, Senator Tillis, who's one of our senators, he's a Republican. He wants to have greater federal charges for protesters who block streets. Now, maybe that's not an important issue, but for many people, but what it's saying is, what do we want to make it harder on people who protest? So in the aspect, if protesting and free speech and being able to express your opinion is something you want to do in a peaceful way, perhaps this is an opportunity to say, maybe that's too tough. Now, we also, this was also mentioned too, is I have heard that it's important, if you can or if it fits, to go ahead and mention the name of an elected official, particularly the one that's in your area, your representative, either local or state. So that is one way too to look at it and say, how can I influence the person that I vote for or have an opportunity to vote for? You also could write in a local letter something about something that's happening in your area that you want to really encourage more people to do. There's several groups right now, for example, in our area that are working on trying to doing the pit count, where you count the number of homeless people, and they're also trying to feed those people. So is that something that you could respond to? Not that there's this is what people are doing in our local area. How can we help those people, or how can we have better legislation and better things? So let me just stop there and let's wait for questions or other comments about it.
Thank you, Sister Rosemary. Sister Rosemary is a member of our Mercy Justice team. She joins us from, well, she's in Oklahoma City today, but she's usually in Belmont, North Carolina. So we do have one question in the chat that Kathleen has addressed, but I'm going to ask you, Kathleen, maybe to address that to the whole group in case not everybody's looking at the chat.
Sure.
Catherine Darcy asked, can you send the same letter to more than one news organization? And while Kathleen's answering that question, if anybody else has a question, if you could use either type it into the chat or use the raise your hand function, and we'll call on you when your turn is up. Kathleen?
So you definitely can. You can send a letter to more than one news organization. They may or may not print it. With letters, they don't typically ask for exclusivity. Op-eds, they often ask for exclusivity. So you have to be very careful. But we're trying to target here. So I think it's better to try and get, to really identify the platform. But you certainly can send it to multiple organizations.
Thank you. Do we have any other questions from the audience?
Actually, one thing I should have mentioned, I made a note and I forgot to mention it, is I wanted to talk about the value of the template. So in my previous life, we would, when we were dealing on a federal level, but with our state mobilizers, we would create a template. And so the bulk of the letter would be the same, but the top, when you're writing specifically about a local politician, that would be what you change out. So using the same couple of paragraphs is a very good idea. How do you find out what the guidelines are? They are, as I said, in a reputable media outlet. They should be available. Go to the website. Look under. Let me see. Sometimes it's letters to the editor. Sometimes it is, you have to look at different keywords. You could even put in guidelines or submissions. And you should be able to find the guidelines there.
Heather, you have your hand up.
Yeah, I thought it might be helpful if you could explain a little more about which newspaper to pick, what media outlet to pick. I mean, obviously there's, a dwindling number, but so not everyone has a local, but I think people maybe make a mistake about shooting too high. So
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's, it's often a missed opportunity to say, oh, I really want to get something in the New York Times because the New York Times wrote this. You know what? Your local papers are looking for content all the time. So it's really good to start locally. All politics are local, and you really want to get on the radar of those politicians. What do you think they're reading? They are reading their hometown newspapers. You can be sure of that. So always try local first. You'll likely have much better luck. You mentioned a boilerplate. Yeah, pretty much I would say, but I wouldn't have used the term boilerplate, but that's fine. But a template, kind of the same message. Your boilerplate message, that's a good way of putting it, actually. And then Catherine, you asked the practice of news organizations to publish virtually rather than in print. Yeah, probably. Remember that digital content that is, the digital world is absolutely insatiable. So they're always looking for more and more for content. How many people even buy hard copies of newspapers anymore? The advantage of there's no great advantage anymore to have something in print. I think some of us for sentimental reasons. My first letter to the editor was published in the Montreal Star when I was 12 years old. I think I still have it. My daughter had one published in the Miami Herald when she was 8, so she wins. But those are just, you're able to like cut them out and keep them. But having something virtual is great because you can put it on social media very easily. You can send multiple copies very easily. So it's much easier. It's better if it's virtual.
And we've got one more question there. Any suggestions for attention-getting openers to draw the reader's attention to pay attention to your article?
I think because it's a letter to the editor, and we talked early on about, it's often a response to something. You want to jump right in and say, here's why I'm writing, without saying I'm writing to you because, right? You want to say, in response to your article, or, if you do have something, kind of clever and pithy, and it truly is, fine. Don't waste too much time worrying about that, though, because editorial page, or I should say, editors on the letters page are always looking for content. So get them something they can use, keep it short and sweet, get to the point, tell them what it is you're writing about. So I don't know if, Rosemary, you have something else you'd add.
I was thinking that most of us are reading our newspapers online. At least I'm assuming that a lot of us are. So it could be easy to go online and look at other letters to the editor that other people have written to see what's been published, and it might help you figure out how things are accepted in that particular paper. Yeah. So, really, I think, like you said, they are looking for things but it really does usually needs to be fairly, I think, recent, fairly what's going on right now. Don't you think? Probably a lot of times what's going on now.
Yeah.
Response to
they call it news for a reason. Yeah, definitely.
Right.
Yeah.
What's responding now?
Yeah. And then Heather asks, how important is a personal connection to an issue? It never hurts. It never hurts. I don't think it's critical, but I think to Rosemary's point about, you don't have to be an expert. It might be something you're knowledgeable about, or it might be something you're angry about. And that passion will shine through in your writing.
It probably is always a good idea if you're trying to put facts in to do some fact checking. On the other hand, I've noticed that I can put facts in on something online and people disagree with you, even if you have the statistics. So,
right.
I
mean, it's like debating the climate science. Why don't we debate gravity while we're at it? It's like, yeah.
Well, thank you both, and thank you for all of our audience members who had some questions. That always brings some more personal interest to the topic that we're presenting on. One of the other nice things about having letters to the editor be virtual is not only can you share them with legislators or friends or on social media, but you can share them with us, and then we can share them with the rest of our Mercy community. And to give you a little incentive to do that, if you get a letter to the editor published in the paper and you send it to us, we're going to send you one of our Mercy Justice t-shirts. They're in purple. They have Mercy for Justice on them in English on the front and in Spanish on the back. And so you could send a link to your letter to the editor to justice@sistersofmercy.org. And we'll thank you for that and share it with some other folks in our community. And we'll send you a shirt. So we didn't have any recent examples of letters to the editor to share with you, but we do have some op-eds to share. So John Charles, as I finish talking here, is going to post some links in the chat of some op-eds that were written by people connected with the Mercy community. Most of them, I think, are on immigration issues, as that's one of the critical concerns that we work on regularly. But you can check those out by following the links. We also, before we close tonight, want to invite you to our next 2 webinars. We'll have a training on February 13th on making phone calls and public comments on government rules. And then on March 12th, we'll do a training on how to set up and conduct in-person meetings with elected officials and other people of importance in your community. Unfortunately, with the way we have this set up on Zoom, you have to register for each session independently. The links will be different for them. So we will put in a follow-up email when we send out the recording and some of the other resources. We'll have links to the registration forms as well. I want to thank our presenters tonight, Kathleen, Sister Rosemarie, and Lamar, for providing our content for this evening. I want to thank John Charles McAllister Ashley, who also works out of our Silver Spring office, for doing our technical support tonight. And then we also had several other people on the planning group, Mary Ann Comfort and Brother Ryan Roberts, who are on our justice team, and Heather Scott Milletta, who is on our communications team. So thank you all for being here, and have a great night.